The most dangerous lie ever told about human skin is that it reveals who deserves to rule and who was born to obey. It does not. Your skin is not a ranking. It is not a measure of intelligence, courage, beauty, or human worth. It is an ancient survival record, written by sunlight across thousands of generations. And once you understand what that record actually says, the entire story of race begins to change. For most of human history, there were no white people. There were no black people. There were no racial categories at all. There were only human beings, and the earliest modern humans were born in Africa with dark, melanin-rich skin that protected their bodies beneath some of the strongest ultraviolet radiation on Earth. That dark skin was not primitive. It was brilliant. It protected essential nutrients, defended developing pregnancies, and allowed our ancestors to survive in the environment where humanity began. But when small groups started leaving Africa and moving into colder regions with weaker sunlight, the same protection created a new challenge. Their bodies could no longer produce vitamin D as easily. Children developed fragile bones. Adults became weaker. Pregnancy became more dangerous. Then evolution began rewriting the surface of the human body. Tiny genetic changes allowed more sunlight to enter the skin. Over thousands of years, some northern populations gradually became lighter. But this transformation did not happen once, and it did not create a superior kind of human. European and East Asian populations developed lighter skin through different genetic pathways, proving that nature found similar solutions to the same environmental problem more than once. Then agriculture changed everything. When humans stopped hunting and gathering and began surviving on grain, many northern communities lost important dietary sources of vitamin D. Bread helped build villages, cities, kingdoms, and civilizations, but it also intensified a hidden biological crisis. Under weak northern skies, lighter skin became even more valuable for survival. The story did not end there. Human beings continued moving, mixing, and adapting. Modern populations carry the genetic traces of ancient farmers, hunters, Neanderthals, Denisovans, migrants, conquerors, refugees, and families whose names history never recorded. There are no pure human bloodlines. There never were. Yet centuries later, societies took these shallow differences in pigmentation and transformed them into systems of power. In America, skin color became connected to slavery, citizenship, property, education, beauty, safety, and belonging. A biological response to sunlight was turned into a political weapon. But the genes never supported the lie. The genes reveal that all humans are overwhelmingly alike. They reveal that visible traits represent only a tiny part of our biology. They reveal that two people placed in the same racial category can be more genetically different from one another than either is from someone in another category. Most importantly, they reveal that every living person belongs to the same extended family. In this story, we will travel from the birthplace of humanity in Africa to the frozen regions of ancient Europe and Asia. We will uncover how melanin protected life, how vitamin D reshaped human bodies, how farming accelerated the spread of lighter skin, and how separate populations developed similar appearances through different genes. We will follow those ancient adaptations into modern America, where people now live beneath skies their ancestors never knew. We will see how pale skin faces intense ultraviolet radiation in the South and Southwest, while deeply pigmented skin faces long winters in northern cities. We will discover how medicine, technology, diet, migration, and culture have changed the rules that once controlled human survival. And we will confront the question beneath every chapter. If skin color was created by climate, chance, and survival, How did humanity ever allow it to become a measure of human value? This is not simply the story of how some humans became white. It is the story of how one dark-skinned African population became every shade of humanity. It is the story of how sunlight changed our appearance without changing what mattered underneath. And it is the story of how America inherited a powerful illusion, an illusion that science can finally help us see through. Look at your hand. The color you see is only the beginning. Beneath it lies a journey of migration, suffering, adaptation, love, violence, and survival that reaches across hundreds of thousands of years. Your skin is not proof that you are separate from anyone. It is proof that your ancestors found a way to stay alive. Your skin is hiding a secret that could destroy almost everything you were taught about race. Not a metaphor, not a political slogan, a biological fact written inside every cell of your body. The color you see when you look at your hand is not the mark of a separate kind of human being. It is not proof that your ancestors were more intelligent, more civilized, more primitive, or more deserving than anyone else. It is the fading record of an ancient emergency, a survival response created by sunlight, hunger, migration, pregnancy, disease, and death. And here is the part that still shocks many people. For most of human history, there were no white people. There were human beings, and they were dark-skinned. Every person alive in the United States today, whether their family came from Nigeria, Norway, Mexico, China, Ireland, India, Japan, Brazil, or the Navajo Nation, carries a history that eventually reaches the same continent, Africa, the place where modern humanity began, the place where our earliest ancestors learned to survive beneath some of the most powerful sunlight on Earth. Before nations, before borders, before churches, before racial categories, before anyone had invented the words black or white, our ancestors faced a problem that could not be negotiated with. The sun was trying to destroy something inside them. Human beings had lost most of the thick body hair that once covered their distant ancestors. That loss helped the body release heat. It made sweating more efficient. It allowed early humans to travel farther, hunt longer, and remain active when many animals were forced to rest. But every advantage has a cost. Without thick fur, human skin became exposed. Ultraviolet radiation could reach the body with far greater intensity. It could damage cells, break chemical bonds, and interfere with the nutrients required to create healthy children. One of those nutrients was folate. Folate supports cell division. It plays a critical role during pregnancy, when a developing child is being assembled at astonishing speed. A spine must close. A brain must form. Tissues must divide in the right sequence. The process is so delicate that even a small disruption can have devastating consequences. Too much ultraviolet radiation can reduce folate in the body. For early humans living near the equator, this was not a minor inconvenience. It was a direct threat to reproduction. A person might survive sun damage. A population could not survive generation after generation of failed pregnancies, developmental problems, and weakened health. The human body needed protection. It found that protection in melanin. Melanin is the pigment that gives color to human skin, hair, and eyes. In skin, it absorbs and disperses ultraviolet radiation before that radiation can penetrate deeper into the body. More melanin means more protection. Less melanin means more ultraviolet light can pass through. In ancient Africa, more protection was usually better. The individuals whose bodies produced greater amounts of dark pigment were more likely to protect their folate, maintain healthy pregnancies, and raise children who survived. Those children inherited many of the same genetic instructions. Across thousands of generations, dark skin became the human standard, not a racial identity, not a cultural symbol, a survival system. For the overwhelming majority of the time that modern humans have existed, dark skin was simply what human skin looked like. If you could stand among our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago, you would not find the racial landscape familiar to modern America. You would not see categories marked on census forms. You would not hear arguments about who belonged to which race. You would see human communities divided by family, language, loyalty, territory, and conflict, but not by the modern color lines that later societies would construct. Their skin carried the same basic solution to the same environmental danger. Dark pigment protected life, but the protection was not absolute, and it was not designed to block every ray of sunlight. Human beings also needed sunlight for another reason. The body uses ultraviolet light to produce vitamin D. Vitamin D allows the body to absorb calcium. Calcium helps build bones, support muscles, regulate nerves, and maintain basic biological systems. Without sufficient vitamin D, bones can become weak and poorly formed. Children can develop rickets. Adults can suffer bone pain, muscle weakness, and fractures. Immune function can also be affected. Human skin was therefore caught between two dangers. Too much ultraviolet radiation could damage the body and threaten folate. Too little ultraviolet radiation could limit vitamin D and weaken the skeleton. Skin color became a biological negotiation between those two risks. In equatorial Africa, dark skin achieved that balance. The sunlight was so intense that even heavily pigmented skin allowed enough ultraviolet light to support vitamin D production. At the same time, melanin protected the body from excessive exposure. The system worked. Human populations grew. They developed tools, built social networks, shared food, cared for children, remembered the dead, and passed knowledge from one generation to the next. They learned to cooperate on a scale that no other human species had achieved in quite the same way. They became extraordinary survivors. Then, some of them began to leave. There was no single morning when a group gathered and announced that humanity would now leave Africa. Migration rarely works that way. It happens through small decisions. A family follows animals farther than usual. A community moves toward water. Young people leave crowded territory. A dry season lasts too long. A familiar food disappears. A distant valley offers opportunity. One movement becomes a settlement. That settlement becomes the starting point for another movement. Generation after generation, people travel beyond the world their grandparents knew. Some moved into the Arabian Peninsula. Some followed coastlines. Others traveled through river systems and grasslands. Their children continued into Southern Asia, Eastern Asia, Australia, Central Asia, and Europe. They did not think of themselves as explorers of the human species. They were searching for food, safety, land, and a future. They carried fire. They carried tools. They carried stories. And they carried dark skin. That skin had protected their ancestors for an almost unimaginable length of time. It was one of the greatest biological success stories in human history. But as people moved farther from the equator, the conditions changed. The sunlight weakened. At northern latitudes, the sun remains lower in the sky. Its rays pass through more of the atmosphere. Seasons become more extreme. Winter can reduce useful ultraviolet radiation for months at a time. Clouds, clothing, shelter, and cold weather can further limit exposure. The same melanin that had protected life in Africa began to create a new problem. It blocked light that had become scarce. At first, the danger would have been difficult to recognize. There was no sudden wound. No predator attacked. No storm destroyed a village. The threat entered quietly. A child grew with legs that were slightly weak. A teenager developed bones that did not form correctly. An adult tired quickly. A wound healed slowly. A woman entered labor with a pelvis shaped by years of vitamin D deficiency. The child could not pass safely through the birth canal. There was no modern hospital, no surgical team, no emergency delivery. The mother died. The child died. The family lost 2 lives in a single night. This was not because dark skin was defective. It was because a brilliant adaptation had been carried into an environment where the rules had changed. That distinction matters. Evolution does not create perfect bodies. It creates bodies that are good enough for a particular set of conditions. Change the conditions, and an advantage can become a disadvantage. A polar bear is not superior to a desert animal because it can survive on ice. A desert animal is not superior because it can endure heat. Each body is an answer to a local question. Human skin worked the same way. In the north, individuals varied. Some produced slightly less melanin than others. The differences may have been small. Perhaps one child was born only a little lighter than the rest of the family. No one knew why. No one understood genes, mutations, or natural selection. But that child could absorb slightly more ultraviolet light. That child might produce slightly more vitamin D. That child might develop stronger bones. If she became a mother, her pelvis might form more successfully. If he became a father, his health might allow him to survive more winters and support more children. A tiny biological difference could create a small reproductive advantage. Small advantages become powerful when repeated for thousands of years. A person with slightly lighter skin had children. Some inherited the same trait. Those children survived at a slightly higher rate. They had children of their own. The trait spread, not because anyone considered pale skin beautiful, advanced, or morally important, but because it helped bodies function in an environment with limited sunlight. This was not a transformation from one race into another. It was a gradual adjustment in pigment. Nothing about the process changed the fundamental humanity of the people involved. Their brains did not suddenly become more capable. Their emotions did not become deeper. Their courage did not increase. Their creativity did not awaken with lighter skin. Their bodies simply allowed more sunlight to pass through the surface. That was the change. And yet, thousands of years later, societies would build empires, laws, fortunes, and systems of violence around that surface difference. They would take a biological adjustment related to sunlight and turn it into a theory of human worth. They would call one color civilized and another savage. They would use skin to decide who could own land, who could vote, who could marry, who could enter a school, who could live in a neighborhood, and who could walk away from an encounter with authority. They would turn pigment into destiny. But pigment was never destiny. It was evidence. Evidence of where ancestors had lived. Evidence of how much ultraviolet radiation their bodies had managed. Evidence of what they ate, how they migrated, and which children survived. That is why the history of skin color is not merely a story about ancient people. It is an American story. The United States contains human lineages shaped by almost every major environment on Earth. Descendants of equatorial Africa live beside descendants of Northern Europe. Families from East Asia share neighborhoods with families from Central America. Indigenous peoples carry histories formed across thousands of years in the Americas. Children are born with ancestors from continents that remained separated for ages. America is one of the places where ancient sunlight meets modern life. A person whose ancestors evolved beneath intense ultraviolet radiation may now spend winter in Minnesota. A person whose ancestors adapted to weak northern sunlight may now live beneath the powerful sun of Arizona or Florida. A child in Chicago may inherit pigment-related genes from West Africa, Ireland, Mexico, and Korea. The old categories begin to fail because they were never designed to hold the full complexity of human ancestry. And the deeper scientists look into the human genetic code, the clearer the truth becomes. The visible differences that societies obsess over are controlled by a remarkably small part of our biology. Human beings share nearly all of their genetic information. Most human variation is found within populations, not neatly divided between the groups Americans commonly call races. Skin color is real. Ancestry is real. Population history is real. But the idea that humanity is divided into separate biological types with separate levels of intelligence, morality, or human value is not supported by the story written in our bodies. Our bodies tell a different story. They tell us that we are travelers. They tell us that we adapt. They tell us that the same species can become dark beneath one sun and pale beneath another without becoming more or less human. They tell us that every face is carrying a record of survival. But the first great transformation had only begun, because sunlight alone does not explain how quickly pale skin spread through parts of Europe. For thousands of years, Many people survived in northern regions without becoming as light as later populations. Something else changed, something created by human hands, something celebrated as the birth of civilization, something that filled villages, built kingdoms, and fed armies. It also weakened bodies, damaged teeth, spread disease, and intensified the vitamin D crisis with terrifying speed. The next chapter of human skin color would not be written by migration alone. It would be written by bread. Bread changed the color of Europe. That sounds impossible until you understand what agriculture took away. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings survived by eating whatever the land, water, and season provided. Their diets changed constantly. Fish from rivers, shellfish from coasts, eggs from nests, meat from hunted animals, wild plants, roots, berries, nuts, insects, and organs rich in nutrients modern people rarely eat. The menu was unpredictable, but it was diverse. That diversity mattered. Many animal foods contain vitamin D, especially fatty fish, liver, eggs, and marine mammals. For people living in northern regions, those foods could help compensate for weak sunlight. A family might endure a dark winter because summer had provided fish, stored fat, dried meat, and organs containing nutrients the body could not easily produce during the coldest months. Those people still faced hardship. Their children still suffered. Winters still killed. But diet gave them another path to vitamin D. Then, humans made one of the most important decisions in history. They planted seeds. At first, farming may have seemed like a miracle. Instead of following animals across dangerous country, people could grow food near their homes. Instead of searching for wild plants, they could cultivate the ones they preferred. Instead of moving whenever resources disappeared, they could build permanent settlements. Farming allowed more people to live on the same land. More people meant larger villages. Larger villages became towns. Towns became cities. Cities produced governments, armies, temples, taxes, writing, trade, and the foundations of modern civilization. Agriculture built the world Americans recognize, but the first farmers paid a brutal price. Their diets became narrower. A hunter might eat dozens of different foods in a season. A farmer might survive mainly on one or two crops: wheat and barley in parts of the Middle East and Europe, rice and millet in Asia, corn in the Americas, sorghum in Africa. These foods provided calories. Calories kept people alive. But staying alive is not the same as being healthy. Grains contain almost no vitamin D. When northern communities replaced fish, game, and animal organs with bread and porridge, they lost a major source of the nutrient their bodies already struggled to produce. The sunlight was weak. Their skin still blocked much of it. Now their food offered little help. The result was not a small nutritional decline. It was a biological emergency. Children developed soft bones. Legs curved beneath their weight. Ribs changed shape. Spines bent. Teeth formed poorly. Muscles weakened. Girls who survived childhood sometimes entered adulthood with pelvises that had not developed normally. Years later, pregnancy turned those childhood deficiencies into deadly consequences. A farming village could produce more food than a hunting camp, yet the people eating that food could be shorter, sicker, and physically weaker than the people who came before them. This is one of history's cruelest contradictions. Civilization expanded while individual health declined. The grain harvest filled storage pits. The population grew, yet inside many bodies, bones were failing. Farming also kept people indoors and close to home. Fields required constant labor, but clothing, houses, seasonal schedules, and social roles could reduce direct skin exposure. Dense settlements spread infectious disease. Repeated illness increased nutritional stress. Pregnant women and children became especially vulnerable. The crisis grew more intense with every generation. Natural selection did not care that agriculture was celebrated as progress. It responded only to one question: who survived long enough to have children? In northern farming communities, a person with slightly lighter skin could produce vitamin D more efficiently from limited sunlight. The difference might not be obvious in a single day. It might not even be dramatic in one lifetime. but across generations, it mattered. A child with lighter skin might build stronger bones. A young woman might survive childbirth. A family might lose fewer infants. A community carrying more light pigmentation variants might grow faster than a neighboring community carrying fewer. Over time, the genetic balance changed. The transformation was not guided. No one chose it. No ancient council decided that future Europeans should become pale. No mother selected a mutation for her child. Mutations appeared by chance. Selection was not chance. When a genetic variant helped people survive and reproduce under particular conditions, that variant became more common. One of the most important changes involved a gene known as SLC24A5. The name sounds mechanical because it is. Genes do not have poetic names. They are pieces of biological instruction, and this one affects the process by which pigment is produced and organized inside cells. A small change in SLC24A5 can reduce skin pigmentation. Another important gene, SLC45A2, also influences melanin production. Variants in this gene became common in European populations. Other genes contributed additional effects. No single mutation created modern European skin. Pigmentation is a complex trait shaped by many genetic instructions. Some variants reduce the amount of melanin. Some change how pigment is packaged. Some affect the type of melanin produced. Some influence the skin more strongly than the hair or eyes. Together, their effects accumulated. Imagine a population in which nearly everyone has dark brown skin. A mutation appears that makes one family slightly lighter. Another variant enters the population through migration. A third already exists at low frequency but becomes more useful when the climate, diet, or way of life changes. These variants meet through marriage and reproduction. A child inherits several of them. That child is lighter than either parent. The process continues. There is no single moment when the population becomes white. There is only a long sequence of births, each carrying a slightly different combination of genes. This is why the modern idea of race creates such a misleading picture. Race imagines clear boundaries. Evolution produces gradients. Race imagines permanent types. Evolution produces changing populations. Race imagines that visible traits arrive together as a package. Genetics reveals that skin, hair, eyes, height, immunity, digestion, and countless other traits can follow different histories. Ancient Europe proves this. Some early Europeans had combinations of features that would surprise many people today. Genetic evidence suggests that certain hunter-gatherers had relatively dark skin and light-colored eyes. Modern Americans often treat blue eyes and pale skin as if they naturally belong together. They do not have to. The genes influencing eye color and the genes influencing skin pigmentation can spread at different times. A person can inherit low pigment in the iris while maintaining much more pigment in the skin. That is likely what happened in parts of ancient Europe. For thousands of years, people lived with combinations that do not fit modern racial expectations. Dark skin, blue eyes, features shaped by ancestry that had not yet settled into the patterns later associated with Northern Europe. Then, farming populations arrived. They came from regions closer to the Middle East and Anatolia. They brought crops, animals, tools, and a new way of life. They also brought their own genetic history. Europe was not transformed by one population simply replacing another. The process involved migration, conflict, cooperation, marriage, and mixture. Hunter-gatherers met farmers. Farmers expanded. Later, steppe populations moved westward. Each group contributed ancestry. Modern Europeans emerged from this mixture, but as these populations lived on grain-based diets under northern skies, the same pressure acted on all of them. The need for vitamin D did not care which group someone came from. It did not care which language they spoke. It did not care which gods they worshipped. A body either produced enough vitamin D or it suffered the consequences. That shared pressure helped light pigmentation variants spread across populations that had once been genetically distinct. This is important because it shows how quickly human identities can change. A community may believe it is separate from its neighbors. It may defend its territory, language, and traditions. Yet the environment can act on all of them in the same way. Sunlight crosses borders. Disease crosses borders. Hunger crosses borders. Children inherit genes from people their ancestors may once have called strangers. The human story is full of enemies who became family without realizing it. Agriculture accelerated this process because farming populations grew rapidly. A hunter-gatherer group needed large territory to support a small number of people. A farming village could support many more families on the same land. Once a successful agricultural community formed, it could expand. New villages appeared. Young families moved outward. Fields replaced forests. Local groups were absorbed, displaced, or joined through marriage. As these communities expanded, the genetic variants that helped them survive expanded with them. A useful pigmentation variant could move not only because it improved survival, but because the population carrying it was growing. This combination was powerful. Natural selection increased the frequency of beneficial variants. Population expansion carried them across large regions. Marriage mixed them into new groups. Within a few thousand years, the appearance of entire populations could change. A few thousand years sounds ancient. In evolutionary time, it is almost nothing. Imagine compressing the entire history of modern humans into a single 24-hour day. Agriculture would appear only in the final hour. The pale skin associated with many modern Northern Europeans would become common near the final minutes. It is not an ancient foundation of humanity. It is a recent adaptation. That fact would later become dangerous because people forgot it. European societies looked at their own features and imagined they had always existed. They projected modern appearance backward into the distant past. They painted ancient people with modern faces. They described whiteness as something timeless, almost sacred. It was neither. It was young. It was local. It was practical. It was a response to weak sunlight, limited vitamin D, changing diets, and survival. Nothing about it made the people carrying those traits superior. Yet much later, Europeans would cross oceans with pale skin shaped by northern conditions and enter lands where darker-skinned populations had lived for thousands of years. They would mistake their recent appearance for proof of ancient dominance. They would use religion, law, weapons, and false science to turn adaptation into hierarchy. In the United States, this distortion would become part of the nation's foundation. People from Europe would be classified as white. People taken from Africa would be classified as black. Indigenous nations would be placed into categories created by outsiders. Laws would decide who counted as white, who could become a citizen, who could own property, and whose children belonged to which group. The categories changed whenever power required them to change. Groups once excluded from full whiteness were gradually absorbed into it. People from Ireland, Italy, Eastern Europe, and other regions were not always treated as belonging equally to the same racial group. Over time, social boundaries shifted. Biology did not change. Politics did. The skin remained what it had always been, pigment, but societies made pigment carry meanings it had never evolved to carry. They made it stand for intelligence. They made it stand for criminality. They made it stand for beauty. They made it stand for citizenship. They made it stand for who deserved protection and who could be exploited. The tragedy was not that human beings noticed color. The tragedy was that they lied about what color meant. Skin color could reveal something about ancestry and ancestral exposure to ultraviolet radiation. It could not reveal the content of a person's mind. It could not measure courage. It could not predict honesty. It could not decide who would become a scientist, an artist, a parent, a leader, or a friend. The same genes that reduced melanin in one population did not carry instructions for civilization. They carried instructions related to pigment, nothing more. And Europe was not the only place where skin became lighter. Far to the east, other populations faced the same weak northern sunlight. They also needed to produce vitamin D. They also changed. but they did not rely on exactly the same genetic path. This is where the story becomes even more powerful. Because human evolution did not invent pale skin once, it discovered similar solutions more than once. Different people, different genes, different histories, the same sun, and that means whiteness was never a single biological event. It was several local answers that modern society later forced into one category. The sun created pale skin more than once. That single fact breaks the illusion that all light-skinned people came from one ancient biological group. They did not. Populations in Europe and East Asia faced similar problems when they moved into regions with weaker ultraviolet radiation. Both needed to produce enough vitamin D. Both gradually developed lighter skin, but the genetic paths were not identical. Evolution reached for different tools. In Europe, variants in genes such as SLC24A5 and SLC45A2 became especially important. In East Asia, other combinations of genes contributed more strongly to pigmentation. The result looked similar from a distance. Lighter skin, but beneath the surface, the molecular story was different. This is called convergent evolution. It happens when separate populations face similar environmental pressures and arrive at similar solutions through different biological routes. Birds and bats both developed wings, but they did not inherit those wings from one recent flying ancestor. Sharks and dolphins both developed streamlined bodies, but one is a fish and the other is a mammal. Nature repeats useful designs. Human skin is another example. A person from northern China and a person from Sweden may both have relatively light skin, but their ancestors did not necessarily become light in the same place, at the same time, or through the same set of mutations. Modern racial categories flatten that complexity. They place people into a few large boxes and pretend the boxes are ancient. The genes tell a different story. They show multiple migrations, multiple mixtures, multiple adaptations, multiple ways of becoming lighter or darker. There was never one road that led to human diversity. There were thousands. The American habit of grouping people into white, black, Asian, Native American, and other broad categories can be useful for understanding discrimination, inequality, and social history. Those categories have real consequences because institutions treat them as real, but they are not clean maps of biology. A category can be socially powerful and biologically imprecise at the same time. That is one of the hardest truths to understand. Race can shape where someone lives, how a doctor treats them, what opportunities they receive, and how likely they are to be stopped by police. Those effects are real, but the biological boundaries beneath the labels remain blurred. People carry ancestry that crosses the categories. A family may identify as black while carrying European and indigenous ancestry. A family may identify as white while carrying ancestry from several regions that were not always considered white in American history. A person identified as Latino may have ancestors from Europe, Africa, the Americas, and Asia. A person identified as Asian may come from a population genetically and historically distant from another population placed under the same label. The category tells part of a social story. It does not tell the whole biological one. Human genetics behaves less like a set of separate boxes and more like rivers joining, dividing, and joining again. That pattern existed long before the United States. Across Central Asia, populations moved between East and West for thousands of years. Traders, herders, soldiers, refugees, and families crossed enormous distances. Their descendants inherited combinations of traits associated today with Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East. In South Asia, migrations layered ancestry across time. Northern and southern populations developed different average patterns, but no sharp line divided them. Skin tones ranged widely, languages changed, empires rose and fell, families mixed. Around the Mediterranean, people traveled by land and sea. North Africa, Southern Europe, and Western Asia were connected long before modern nations drew borders between them. The human body remembers those connections even when history books forget them. Genes move through love, violence, trade, slavery, adoption, conquest, and ordinary family life. They do not stop at the edge of a map. This is why no population is pure. Purity is a political fantasy. Every human group is the result of earlier groups meeting. Some meetings were peaceful, some were brutal. All of them changed the future. The United States is not an exception to that pattern. It is an acceleration of it. In only a few centuries, people whose ancestors had been separated by oceans came together on one continent. Some arrived voluntarily. Some were forced across the Atlantic in chains. Some were already here, living in nations with histories older than the country that would later claim their land. Others came through war, famine, work, family, education, and hope. They met under unequal conditions. They created children. They created communities. They created conflicts. They created new identities. America became a living experiment in what happens when ancient human adaptations are placed side by side. A pale-skinned child in Maine may carry genes shaped by Northern Europe. A dark-skinned child in Georgia may carry genes shaped by Equatorial Africa. A Mexican-American family in California may carry ancestry from indigenous American, European, African, and Asian sources. A native Alaskan family may carry adaptations connected to northern climates and diets. A child born in Houston may inherit several of these histories at once. The old biological stories overlap inside new bodies. Sometimes the overlap produces features that confuse people who expect race to behave predictably. Siblings can have different skin tones. A child can be much lighter or darker than a parent. Hair texture can vary within the same family. Eye color can appear unexpectedly. Facial features can reflect one branch of ancestry, while skin tone reflects another. This is not evidence that genetics has failed. It is evidence that racial expectations were too simple. Human inheritance is a reshuffling. A child does not receive a smooth average of both parents. The child receives a new combination of genetic variants. Some traits are influenced by many genes. Others depend on a smaller number. The result can be surprising, even within one household. Families reveal what populations hide. There are no perfect categories. There are only patterns and probabilities. That same complexity appears in the history of indigenous peoples of the Americas. The first populations entered the Americas thousands of years before European colonization. Their ancestors had traveled through northern Asia and carried genetic traits shaped by earlier environments. As communities spread southward, they encountered nearly every climate on Earth. Arctic cold, temperate forests, high mountains, open plains, deserts, tropical rainforests, coastal regions with intense sunlight. Different communities adapted through culture, diet, clothing, shelter, technology, and biology. Some maintained lighter or moderate pigmentation. Others developed darker skin in regions with stronger ultraviolet radiation. The Americas did not contain one environment, so they did not produce one appearance. European colonizers later compressed this diversity into a single category: Indian. The label ignored hundreds of nations, languages, histories, and physical variations. Again, society created a box where biology and culture had created a spectrum. The same happened to people taken from Africa. Africa contains more human genetic diversity than any other continent. That makes sense because humans lived there the longest. Populations had more time to develop differences, move, separate, reconnect, and adapt to local environments. West Africans, East Africans, Southern Africans, and North Africans are not one biological type. They carry distinct histories. Yet American slavery reduced millions of people to a single racial identity: black. The category served power. It did not describe the full depth of ancestry. Slaveholders did not need accurate genetics. They needed a system that justified ownership. Skin color provided a visible marker. Law supplied the violence. Religion was sometimes twisted into permission. False science arrived later to make the system look rational. Measurements were taken. Skulls were compared. Bodies were ranked. Results were manipulated to support conclusions chosen in advance. The goal was never discovery. The goal was justification. If one group could be declared naturally inferior, then exploitation could be called order. If inequality could be blamed on biology, then those who benefited from inequality could avoid responsibility. This is how a survival adaptation became a weapon. The lie grew powerful because skin color is visible. No test is required to notice it. Humans are skilled at recognizing patterns, but pattern recognition can become prejudice when the mind assigns meaning too quickly. A visible difference begins to stand for invisible qualities. Dark skin becomes associated with danger. Light skin becomes associated with innocence. One face is treated as familiar. Another is treated as foreign. The response happens before evidence. Then institutions reinforce it. Movies repeat it. Schools avoid its history. Neighborhoods preserve its economic effects. Families pass it down through warnings, jokes, silence, and fear. A biological trait shaped by sunlight becomes a social signal shaped by power. That transformation is not ancient. It was built. And because it was built, it can be challenged. The science of human skin does not erase racism. It reveals how little biological foundation racism ever had. It shows that the meanings attached to color were invented after the color itself. The pigment came first. The hierarchy came later. One was created by survival. The other was created by people. That distinction matters because people often defend inequality by calling it natural. They say groups have always been separate. They say differences in achievement prove differences in ability. They say history merely reflects biology. But history is filled with unequal access to education, land, healthcare, voting, safety, and wealth. When one population is denied opportunity for generations, the outcome cannot honestly be treated as a test of genetic worth. Social systems shape human lives far more quickly than evolution changes human bodies. A law can change in a year. A neighborhood can be divided in a decade. A family can lose wealth in one forced sale. A school can be underfunded for generations. Those effects accumulate. Then society looks at the result and calls it natural. It is not. The genes that influence melanin do not decide who receives a mortgage. They do not choose which school district receives funding. They do not determine whose pain is believed in an emergency room. They do not write sentencing laws. People do those things. Institutions do those things. Culture does those things. Biology becomes the excuse. The story of skin color offers another way to see the human face. A dark-skinned person is not carrying evidence of inferiority. That person is carrying a powerful ancestral defense against intense ultraviolet radiation. A light-skinned person is not carrying evidence of superiority. That person is carrying an ancestral adjustment to limited sunlight. An intermediate skin tone may reflect generations lived between those conditions, or the meeting of lineages shaped in different places. Every shade is functional history. Every shade is an answer to sunlight. None is a ranking. This becomes even clearer when we examine people who did not follow the simple rule that northern populations should always become extremely pale. The Inuit are one of the most important examples. They lived at some of the highest latitudes on Earth, where winter sunlight can disappear for long periods. If weak ultraviolet radiation automatically produced very pale skin, Inuit populations should have become among the palest in the world. They did not. Their traditional diet changed the equation. Fish, seal, whale, and other animal foods provided large amounts of vitamin D. Their bodies did not need to depend entirely on sunlight. Culture reduced the pressure for extreme skin lightening. This is a profound lesson. Human beings do not adapt only through genes. They adapt through knowledge. A diet can alter natural selection. Clothing can alter natural selection. Shelter can alter natural selection. Fire can alter natural selection. Culture changes which biological traits become necessary. Evolution shaped the human body. Human intelligence began shaping the conditions under which evolution operated. That power would eventually become enormous. In the modern United States, a person can live far from the climate that shaped their ancestral pigmentation. A dark-skinned family can live in Alaska. A light-skinned family can live in Hawaii. A child can spend nearly every day indoors, regardless of ancestry. Artificial lighting, air conditioning, sunscreen, fortified foods, and vitamin supplements separate daily life from ancient environmental pressures. We have not escaped biology. We have learned to negotiate with it. But that negotiation brings new risks, because when bodies move faster than evolution, old adaptations can collide with new environments. The next part of the story is not buried in ancient bones. It is happening now. It is happening in American homes, schools, hospitals, beaches, offices, and neighborhoods. It is happening when pale skin meets relentless ultraviolet radiation. It is happening when heavily pigmented skin meets long northern winters. It is happening when people live indoors beneath artificial light and assume modern life has made sunlight irrelevant. The ancient balance between melanin, vitamin D, and ultraviolet radiation has not disappeared. It has followed us into the modern world, and for millions of people, that invisible conflict is still shaping health. Your body may be living under the wrong sun. That is one of the strangest consequences of modern life. For thousands of generations, human skin changed slowly in response to local conditions. Families lived beneath roughly the same pattern of sunlight as their ancestors. Darker pigmentation remained common where ultraviolet radiation was intense. Lighter pigmentation spread where useful ultraviolet light was limited. The relationship was never perfect, but it was stable enough for evolution to work. Then ships crossed oceans, railroads crossed continents. Airplanes turned migrations that once required hundreds of generations into journeys lasting a few hours. A person could leave Lagos in the morning and arrive in Minneapolis before the body had time to understand that the sun had changed. A family from Ireland could settle in southern Florida, where the ultraviolet radiation was far stronger than anything their recent ancestors had experienced. A child could inherit skin shaped by one continent and grow up under the sky of another. Evolution had spent thousands of years adjusting human pigmentation. Modern transportation scrambled the arrangement almost overnight. The result was not a failure of the human body. It was a mismatch between an old adaptation and a new environment. Consider light skin. In northern regions with weak ultraviolet radiation, reduced pigmentation can help the body produce vitamin D more efficiently. That advantage may have supported stronger bones, healthier development, and more successful pregnancies. But the same skin placed under intense ultraviolet radiation faces a different calculation. Less melanin means less natural protection. Ultraviolet rays penetrate more easily. They damage genetic material inside skin cells. The body repairs much of that damage, but the process is not perfect. With repeated exposure, errors can accumulate. Most damaged cells die or recover. Some do not. A cell may begin dividing without normal control. A tumor can form. Skin cancer is not a punishment for having pale skin. It is the cost of carrying a low pigmentation adaptation into an environment where ultraviolet radiation is abundant. That cost is visible in places such as Australia, where large populations of European ancestry live under powerful sunlight. Their ancestors developed lighter pigmentation in regions where sunlight was often weaker. Their descendants entered an environment in which the same trait offered less protection. The biology did not become defective. The geography changed. The United States contains the same collision. A fair-skinned family may live in Arizona, Southern California, Texas, or Florida. Children may spend summers beside pools, on athletic fields, or at the beach. The skin can burn quickly because it contains relatively little protective melanin. A sunburn may look temporary. The damage is not always temporary. Each serious burn adds to a lifetime of ultraviolet exposure. The risk is especially important during childhood, when repeated damage can influence health decades later. Yet American culture has often treated tanning as a sign of beauty, wealth, health, or leisure. For much of history, Pale skin in Europe and the United States was associated with wealth because it suggested that a person did not perform outdoor labor. Later, industrial work moved many people indoors, travel became more affordable, and tanned skin began to suggest vacation, recreation, and freedom. The meaning changed. The biology did not. Ultraviolet radiation continued damaging cells whether society considered the result beautiful or not. This is a pattern that appears repeatedly in human history. Culture assigns meaning. The body continues obeying chemistry. Now reverse the situation. Imagine a person whose ancestors lived for thousands of years in an environment with intense sunlight. Their skin contains abundant melanin. That pigmentation provides powerful protection against ultraviolet damage. Then the person moves north. Perhaps the family settles in Boston, Detroit, Seattle, Chicago, or Minneapolis. Winter arrives. Days become short. The sun stays low. Cold weather covers the skin with layers of clothing. Work and school keep everyone indoors. The protective melanin still performs its ancient function. It blocks ultraviolet radiation. But now, ultraviolet radiation is scarce. The body may struggle to produce enough vitamin D. The person may feel no immediate crisis. Vitamin D deficiency can be quiet. There may be fatigue, bone discomfort, muscle weakness, or no obvious symptom at all. Children are especially important because their bones are still developing. Pregnant women may also have greater nutritional needs. Older adults can face additional risks because the skin becomes less efficient at producing vitamin D with age. This does not mean every dark-skinned person living in a northern city will become deficient. Health never follows one rule. Diet matters. Time outdoors matters. Age matters. Clothing matters. Body composition, medication, season, and individual biology all matter. Skin pigmentation changes the probability. It does not dictate destiny. That distinction is essential because medical information can become another source of racial misunderstanding. Averages describe populations. Doctors treat individuals. A person should not be reduced to a color category, but pigmentation can still be relevant when evaluating sun exposure, vitamin D, skin conditions, and health risks. Good medicine must hold both truths at once. Human beings are overwhelmingly similar. Visible adaptations can still influence specific areas of health. The danger comes when a narrow difference is treated as evidence of a total biological separation. For example, darker skin can make certain signs harder to recognize if medical training relies too heavily on images of pale skin. Inflammation may not appear bright red. Changes in oxygen levels may be less obvious through visual inspection. Some skin conditions can present differently across pigmentation levels. The problem is not the patient's skin. The problem is a medical system trained on too narrow a picture of humanity. For generations, textbooks, clinical photographs, and research populations often overrepresented people of European ancestry. Medical professionals could complete years of education without seeing enough examples of how illness appears on darker skin. That gap has consequences. A condition can be missed. Pain can be underestimated. Treatment can be delayed. A biological variation becomes dangerous because an institution failed to account for it. This is another way race operates in America, not as a set of separate human species, but as a social system that shapes which bodies receive attention, research, protection, and belief. The same can happen with vitamin D. Researchers may observe different average levels among populations and immediately search for a racial explanation. But skin pigmentation is only part of the story. Income can influence diet. Neighborhood safety can influence outdoor activity. Work schedules can limit sunlight. Access to healthcare affects testing and treatment. Housing, pollution, stress, and discrimination shape health over time. Biology and society are woven together. Pulling one thread does not reveal the whole pattern. The history of skin color teaches humility. It tells us that a visible trait may have a clear evolutionary function without explaining everything about the person who carries it. It tells us not to ignore biology. It also tells us not to worship it. In modern America, technology helps manage many of the mismatches created by migration. Sunscreen reduces ultraviolet exposure. Protective clothing provides shade. Vitamin D supplements compensate for limited synthesis. Fortified milk, cereal, and other foods add nutrients that may be missing from the environment or diet. Doctors can measure blood levels. Public health campaigns can warn communities about sun damage. These inventions allow people to live safely in places their ancestral pigmentation did not specifically prepare them for. A pale-skinned person can build a life beneath tropical sunlight. A deeply pigmented person can thrive in a northern winter. Human culture has turned ancient biological limits into manageable risks. But technology does not help equally when access is unequal. Sunscreen costs money. Medical testing costs money. Healthy food costs money. Some workers cannot avoid the sun. Others rarely see it. A construction worker may spend 10 hours outdoors without adequate protection. A warehouse worker may enter before sunrise and leave after dark. A child may live in a neighborhood without safe parks. An office worker may spend nearly every daylight hour under artificial lighting. Modern environments create new patterns of exposure that latitude alone cannot predict. The ancient equation was simple enough. Where do you live? How strong is the sun? How much melanin do you have? The modern equation is more complicated. Where do you work? How much time do you spend outside? What do you eat? What healthcare can you access? What products can you afford? What habits did your family teach you? What risks did your culture tell you to ignore? Human skin now exists at the intersection of ancestry, technology, economics, and behavior. That does not make evolution irrelevant. It makes evolution more personal. Your body is carrying instructions written under conditions that may no longer exist. The hunger your ancestors faced may shape how efficiently you store energy. The diseases they survived may influence your immune system. The altitude they inhabited may affect how your blood handles oxygen. The sunlight they lived beneath may influence how your skin manages ultraviolet radiation. You are not trapped by those instructions, but you are not separate from them. This is why ancestry can matter without determining worth. It can provide clues about health. It cannot provide a ranking of humanity. It can explain a vulnerability. It cannot define a destiny. The problem begins when people confuse difference with hierarchy. America has done that repeatedly. A difference in skin pigmentation became a difference in legal status. A difference in ancestry became a difference in access. A difference in appearance became a difference in presumed character. Science was sometimes used to challenge those beliefs. It was also sometimes corrupted to defend them. Measurements were presented without context. Correlations were mistaken for causes. Social inequality was treated as biological evidence. The language changed, but the structure of the argument remained familiar. One group was successful because it was naturally superior. Another group suffered because it was naturally deficient. History disappeared. Policy disappeared. Violence disappeared. Only biology remained, stripped of context and forced to explain what society had created. The story of pigmentation exposes that deception. Pale skin did not evolve to build governments. Dark skin did not evolve to perform labor. Eye shape did not evolve to determine loyalty. Hair texture did not evolve to predict intelligence. These traits emerged through combinations of climate, ancestry, chance, and selection. They became symbols only after human societies assigned them meanings. The symbols became powerful because people acted on them. A false idea can still produce real suffering. A fictional boundary can still decide where a family is allowed to live. A category invented by law can still shape wealth generations later. This is why saying race is socially constructed does not mean racism is imaginary. Money is socially constructed. Citizenship is socially constructed. Borders are socially constructed. Their consequences are real because institutions enforce them. Race operates in the same way. The categories are historically created. The effects enter bodies. Stress raises blood pressure. Pollution damages lungs. Poor nutrition affects development. Fear changes behavior. Unequal treatment changes survival. Social ideas become biological outcomes. Then, those outcomes are sometimes used to justify the original inequality. The cycle feeds itself. Breaking that cycle requires more than repeating that all people are equal. It requires understanding how the illusion was built. It requires separating ancestry from worth. It requires recognizing that a visible adaptation to sunlight became attached to systems of power. It requires teaching children what skin color actually means before society teaches them what to fear. Imagine what would change if every American child learned the real story early. A child with dark skin would learn that melanin is not a stain or a flaw. It is an ancient protective system carried through generations of survival. A child with pale skin would learn that light pigmentation is not evidence of superiority. It is an adaptation that helped ancestors live where useful sunlight was scarce. A child with parents from different backgrounds would learn that their features are not contradictions. They are a meeting place of human journeys. A classroom full of different faces would not be evidence that separate kinds of people had been placed together. It would be evidence that one adaptable species had traveled many roads and met again. That lesson would not erase prejudice, but it would weaken the lie beneath it. Because once the real story is understood, the old hierarchy begins to look absurd. The pigment that once helped a child build strong bones in Northern Europe cannot prove that child's distant descendants deserve more political power. The pigment that protected pregnancy beneath equatorial sunlight cannot prove that a person is less intelligent. The argument collapses under the weight of biology. Human diversity is not a ladder. It is a library of solutions. Each population carries chapters about survival under different conditions. Some chapters involve sunlight. Others involve disease, diet, cold, altitude, or water. No chapter contains the full definition of humanity. That definition is shared. The same need for belonging. The same fear of loss. The same capacity to love, invent, protect, destroy, forgive, and hope. These are the traits that built America. Not whiteness, not blackness, not any single ancestry. America was built by human beings carrying different histories into the same unfinished story. The tragedy is that the country often treated those differences as reasons for domination. The possibility is that it can learn to see them as evidence of endurance. But before that possibility can become real, one final illusion must be confronted. The idea that human groups remained separate long enough to become fundamentally different. They did not. Our ancestors met too often. They moved too far. They shared too many children. Even before modern globalization, the human family was already mixed with lineages older than our own species. Inside millions of Americans are fragments of people once considered entirely separate kinds of humans. Neanderthals, Denisovans, ancient populations whose names are lost. They are not distant strangers. They are still alive inside us, and their survival reveals the final truth about color, ancestry, and what it has always meant to be human. You are not descended from one pure line of humans. No one is. Inside your body are traces of ancient meetings, forgotten migrations, vanished peoples, and families whose names were never recorded. Some of those ancestors belonged to populations that once seemed so different that scientists classified them as separate kinds of humans. They were not strangers to us. They became part of us. When modern humans moved out of Africa, they entered lands already inhabited by other human populations. Neanderthals lived across parts of Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans occupied regions of Asia. Other groups may have existed whose remains have not yet been found or whose genetic signatures survive without a name. For a long time, the popular story was simple. Modern humans arrived. The others disappeared. We replaced them. The truth was more intimate. We met them. We competed with them. We learned from them. We had children with them. Those children survived. Their descendants continued. Today, many people with ancestry outside sub-Saharan Africa carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA. Some populations in Asia and the Pacific carry Denisovan ancestry as well. These genetic fragments are not museum pieces. Some affect the living body. Ancient inherited variants may influence immune responses, skin biology, metabolism, and adaptation to environments our direct ancestors had not yet mastered. One of the clearest examples involves high altitude. Populations living on the Tibetan Plateau can function in air containing far less oxygen than most people experience. Their bodies do not respond in exactly the same way as those of lowland populations. Part of that adaptation appears connected to a genetic variant inherited from Denisovan-related ancestors. An ancient meeting between different human populations may have helped later generations survive among the highest mountains on Earth. That is the real pattern of human history, not purity. Borrowing, mixing, adaptation through connection. A group enters unfamiliar territory. Another group has already survived there for thousands of years. Their genes contain useful solutions. Through interbreeding, some of those solutions move into the newcomers. Evolution does not care about the boundaries people later create. It uses whatever survives. This should make the modern obsession with racial purity collapse immediately. There is no untouched human bloodline. There is no population standing outside the history of mixture. Even groups isolated for long periods carry ancestry from earlier encounters. Every lineage is a river fed by older rivers. Some tributaries are large and obvious. Others are nearly invisible. All of them contribute to the current. The idea of purity becomes even less believable when we examine the United States. For centuries, American institutions tried to draw hard racial lines. They passed laws defining who counted as black, white, native, Asian, or something else. They demanded that mixed human beings choose one box. In many places, the law chose for them. A person with one known African ancestor could be classified as black, regardless of appearance. This was not biology. It was property law. During slavery, the children of enslaved women inherited enslaved status. The system had to decide where children of mixed ancestry belonged. It made the answer serve ownership. After slavery, racial classification continued to protect political and economic power. Segregation required boundaries. Voting restrictions required boundaries. Marriage laws required boundaries. Human ancestry remained complex. The law pretended it was simple. The result was a nation filled with people whose bodies contradicted the categories assigned to them. A person could look white and be legally classified as black. A person could belong to an indigenous nation and also carry European and African ancestry. A family could change racial identity after crossing a state line. A community might be accepted as white in one era and excluded in another. The genes did not change. The rules did. That is how we know race is not a fixed biological structure. Biology does not transform when a legislature votes. Ancestry does not change when a census form changes its categories. Skin does not receive new meaning from nature when a court issues a ruling. The meaning comes from society, yet those meanings can become so familiar that they feel natural. A child sees racial boxes before learning the history behind them. The boxes appear permanent because they were present before the child was born. Their origins disappear. But every category has a history. The term white did not always include the same people. Early American society often treated English Protestant ancestry as the standard of belonging. Later, immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Poland, Greece, and other parts of Europe faced hostility and exclusion. They were described as inferior. Their loyalty was questioned. Their intelligence was attacked. Their religions were treated as threats. Over time, many of these groups were gradually absorbed into American whiteness. Their skin had not suddenly become lighter. The political category had expanded. This expansion offered access to jobs, neighborhoods, schools, voting power, and social acceptance that remained restricted for many Black, Indigenous, Asian, and Latino Americans. Whiteness functioned less like a biological discovery and more like a membership system. Its boundaries changed when power changed. That does not mean every white American experienced privilege in the same way. Poverty, disability, gender, religion, region, and family history all shaped individual lives. It means the racial category itself was constructed to provide relative protection and belonging. The category was real in its consequences. It was unstable in its biology. This distinction matters because people often hear that race is a social construction and assume the statement denies visible difference. It does not. People differ in skin tone. They differ in hair texture. They differ in average frequencies of certain genetic variants. Ancestry can sometimes provide useful information about population history or specific medical risks, but those patterns do not divide humanity into a small number of natural, permanent, internally uniform races. The borders do not hold. Imagine trying to divide the colors of a sunset into exact sections. At one point, you might call the sky red, farther away, orange, then gold. But where, precisely, does red stop and orange begin? There is no single line. The colors blend. Human variation works in a similar way. As populations moved across geography, traits often changed gradually. Skin pigmentation generally became darker where ultraviolet radiation was stronger and lighter where it was weaker. But migration, diet, clothing, intermarriage, and local history complicated the pattern. There was no global border where one race ended and another began. There were transitions, a series of connected populations, a continuous human landscape. Modern categories cut through that landscape for social reasons. They simplify a complicated world. Sometimes simplification is useful. Public health researchers may need categories to identify unequal outcomes. Civil rights laws may need language to measure discrimination. Communities may build identity and solidarity around shared experiences. The danger appears when the category is mistaken for the complete person. No census box can contain a human being. It cannot describe every ancestor. It cannot predict every gene. It cannot measure the future, and it cannot tell you what someone deserves. The deeper we look into human history, the more the same lesson returns. Difference is real. Separation is exaggerated. Connection is older than division. Even the visible traits associated with geography are not fixed forever. Human skin can become lighter across generations when populations move into low ultraviolet environments and face strong selection. It can become darker when populations remain in or move toward regions with intense ultraviolet exposure. Pigmentation can also change through migration and intermarriage without waiting for natural selection. A population's average appearance can shift because new people enter, families form, and genes mix. That process is happening rapidly in the United States. Each generation includes more people with ancestry from multiple regions of the world. The old racial boxes have increasing difficulty describing them. A child may have one grandparent from Nigeria, one from Korea, one from Mexico, and one from rural Ohio. Which ancient sunlight defines that child? Which single migration? Which category? The body contains all of them. The future of human appearance may not resemble the sharp categories inherited from the past. In major American cities, people from lineages shaped on different continents meet every day. They work together, fall in love, build families, and produce combinations of traits that may never have existed before. This is not the disappearance of human diversity. It is the creation of new diversity. The palette is not becoming empty. The colors are forming new patterns. Some people fear this mixing because they believe identity requires biological separation. History shows the opposite. Identity has always survived mixture. Languages borrow words. Music combines traditions. Food crosses borders. Families adopt new customs while preserving old ones. Cultures change and remain recognizable. Human beings are not weakened by connection. Connection is how we survived, Our ancestors survived by sharing knowledge. One group understood a plant. Another knew a river crossing. One carried resistance to a disease. Another carried an adaptation to altitude or climate. Human progress came from exchange. The same is true in the American story. The country's music cannot be separated into pure origins. Its food cannot. Its language cannot. Its technology cannot. Its literature cannot. Its people cannot. American culture was created through collision, theft, cooperation, resistance, imitation, invention, and mixture. Some of those encounters were chosen. Many were not. The result is still shared. A nation can acknowledge that mixture without pretending the history was equal. Unity does not require forgetting injustice. Recognizing one human family does not erase slavery, colonization, segregation, or discrimination. In fact, shared humanity makes those systems more horrifying. They were not distant species harming each other. They were relatives creating legal permission to dominate relatives. The science of common ancestry does not excuse history. It removes the excuse history used. There was never a biological foundation for treating one group as less human. There was power. There was fear. There was greed. There was inherited belief. There was violence. But there was no separate humanity. This truth has emotional weight because race is not merely an academic subject in America. It is tied to family memory. It lives in stories about neighborhoods families could not enter. Schools children were not allowed to attend. Names changed to avoid discrimination. Languages hidden so children would sound more American. Hair altered to appear acceptable. Skin lightened in advertisements and photographs. Relationships rejected. Opportunities denied. People learned to survive not only the sun, but one another's judgments. Colorism emerged within racial groups as well. Lighter skin was sometimes rewarded because societies associated it with proximity to power. Darker skin was punished because the hierarchy created by colonialism and slavery continued to shape beauty, status, and opportunity. Families absorbed these beliefs. Children heard warnings about staying out of the sun. They heard relatives praise one complexion and criticize another. They learned that even inside a shared community, shade could affect how the world responded. This was not natural selection. It was social selection. People made choices based on meanings attached to color. Those choices influenced marriage, employment, media representation, and status. Culture began shaping which appearances received advantage. Biology created variation. Power ranked it. That ranking can feel personal because it enters the mirror. A person may look at their own skin and see not ancestry, but judgment. Too dark, too pale, too foreign, not authentic enough, not acceptable enough. The body becomes a battlefield for ideas created before the person was born. The story of human evolution offers another mirror. It says your skin is not an argument against you. It is evidence that someone survived. Your pigmentation is the result of countless lives continuing through heat, cold, hunger, disease, migration, and uncertainty. Your features are not mistakes. They are inherited outcomes. Some were shaped by selection. Some came through chance. Some arrived through love between people whose descendants would later be placed in different categories. Every face is a record of connection. Even traits that society treats as symbols of separation may have traveled across populations many times. A light-skin variant can enter a darker population through migration. A dark pigmentation variant can move into a lighter population. Eye color, hair form, facial structure, and other traits can follow separate ancestral paths. People do not inherit race as a single package. They inherit genes. Society assembles those visible outcomes into an identity. Sometimes the identity offers belonging. Sometimes it imposes a burden. Often it does both. The challenge is not to erase identity. The challenge is to prevent identity from becoming a prison. A person can honor African ancestry without believing all Africans are biologically identical. A person can value European heritage without turning whiteness into superiority. A person can belong to an indigenous nation whose identity depends on kinship, community, history, and sovereignty rather than a crude racial measurement. A person can identify as Asian American while recognizing the enormous diversity contained in that term. A person can be multiracial without being forced to divide themselves into fractions. Human identity is allowed to be complex because human history is complex. The future will demand that complexity. As migration continues and families become more interconnected, the old boxes will face increasing pressure. Some will change. Some may remain because shared social experiences still matter. New identities will appear. But beneath all of them, the biological truth will remain stable. Human beings are one young species. We are more connected than our appearances suggest. Our visible differences developed recently. Our shared history is much older. The genes affecting pigmentation sit on top of an inheritance, stretching back through dark-skinned modern humans, earlier human populations, and ancestors who lived before anyone could imagine a nation or a race. That inheritance does not belong to one group. It belongs to everyone. And now the story returns to the individual, to your hand, to your face, to the skin you have carried through every joy, embarrassment, injury, touch, illness, and ordinary day of your life. What does that skin actually say about you? It says something important, but far less than society taught you to believe. It can whisper where some of your ancestors lived. It can suggest what kind of sunlight their bodies faced. It can reveal one chapter of adaptation. It cannot reveal the full story. That final story is not about how humans became white, black, brown, golden, pale, or any other shade. It is about how one species survived long enough to become all of them, and in the final chapter, every road returns to the same place, not a race, not a nation, a family. The first human family did not begin with color. It began with survival. Long before anyone called themselves white, black, Asian, Native, European, African, American, or anything else, there were small groups of people trying to keep children alive, find food, avoid disease, survive drought, and make it through one more season. They did not know they were creating the future. They did not know that their descendants would cross oceans, build cities, fight wars, write constitutions, divide one another into races, and eventually uncover the genetic evidence proving that those divisions had never been as deep as they appeared. They only knew the immediate world. A child was hungry. A wound needed care. A storm was approaching. Someone had died. Someone else was being born. Humanity continued because ordinary people protected one another through extraordinary danger. Every person alive is the result of that protection. Your existence is not only a product of strong genes, it is the result of food shared when there was not enough. Knowledge passed to a younger generation. A fever survived. A predator avoided. A stranger accepted. A mother protected. A child carried. Evolution is often described as competition, but the human story is also a story of cooperation. Our ancestors survived because they could communicate, remember, teach, and trust. A person alone could be powerful. A group could become nearly unstoppable. One person knew where water remained during drought. Another understood animal movement. Another remembered which plants healed and which plants killed. Another could calm a frightened child. Another could make a sharper tool. Survival lived in the network between them. That network is still alive. It exists in every family, neighborhood, school, hospital, workplace, and community where people help one another continue. This is why the deepest meaning of human skin cannot be understood through pigment alone. Skin records adaptation. Humanity records connection. The color of your body may carry clues about ancient sunlight, but the fact that you are here carries evidence of countless relationships. Someone chose to care. Someone chose to share. Someone chose not to give up. That is the inheritance beneath every shade. When early humans left Africa, They did not stop being members of the same family. Distance changed them slowly. Climate shaped their bodies. Diets altered their biology. Isolation allowed certain traits to become more common in one region than another. But the branches never became separate trees. They remained connected to the same roots. Some branches met again. Some exchanged genes. Some remained apart for thousands of years and later reunited. Humanity spread across the planet, but it never divided into separate forms of worth. The appearance of difference became greater. The foundation remained the same. Modern genetics has made that truth impossible to ignore. Human beings share nearly all of their DNA. The portion that varies creates extraordinary diversity. But most of that diversity does not align with the racial categories used in everyday American life. A person can share a skin tone with someone and differ from them in countless other genetic ways. Two people placed in different racial categories can share important biological traits. A visible feature may reveal one piece of ancestry while concealing many others. The human genome does not organize itself according to American census forms. It carries migrations. It carries mixtures. It carries ancient population histories. It carries the record of people crossing boundaries that had not yet been invented. The science does not say everyone is identical. It says something more interesting. We are different without being separate. That is a harder idea than simple sameness, but it is more honest. Every person is unique. Populations can differ in average frequencies of certain traits. Ancestry can matter. Environment can matter. Culture can matter. History can matter. None of those truths requires hierarchy. Difference does not automatically create rank. Society creates rank when it decides one difference should control power. For centuries, the United States treated skin color as a political technology. Color helped determine who could be enslaved, who could become a citizen, who could own land, who could testify in court, who could attend a school, who could enter a neighborhood, who could marry, who could vote, who would be believed, who would be feared. The biological trait itself did none of those things. People built systems around it. That means the future is not controlled by pigment. It is controlled by what people choose to do with the meanings inherited from the past. A child is not born believing that one skin tone represents danger and another represents innocence. That lesson is taught. Sometimes it is taught directly, sometimes through silence, sometimes through media, sometimes through who is missing from positions of authority, sometimes through the way adults tense when someone enters a room, sometimes through a joke that everyone is expected to understand. Bias can become familiar before a child has the language to question it. But history can also be taught. Science can be taught. Curiosity can be taught. A child can learn that melanin is a pigment, not a moral category. That light skin and dark skin are adaptations, not competing levels of humanity. That the first modern humans were African. That pale skin became common relatively recently in some populations. That similar appearances can arise through different genetic paths. That every population has mixed, moved, changed, and survived. That lesson does not ask children to ignore race. It gives them the tools to understand it. They can recognize racial injustice without believing racial hierarchy is natural. They can value cultural identity without imagining biological purity. They can celebrate difference without turning difference into destiny. They can look at another human face and see history rather than threat. That shift may seem small. Small shifts can spread. A mutation begins in one body. An idea can begin in one mind. Both can move through generations. The beliefs Americans hold today will shape how future children understand themselves. They may inherit the old categories, but they do not have to inherit every old conclusion. They can build a language in which ancestry is respected, injustice is named, and human worth remains equal. The future of race in America will not be decided by whether visible differences disappear. They will not. Human diversity is not fading into one uniform appearance. New combinations are forming constantly. The future will be decided by whether difference continues to function as permission for domination. That is the real choice. Human beings have always noticed variation. The question is, what story follows the noticing? One story says that appearance reveals character. That ancestry determines intelligence. That power proves superiority. That inequality reflects nature. That story has been told for centuries. It has caused enormous damage. Another story begins with the same visible world and reaches a different conclusion. It says every shade of human skin represents adaptation. Every population contains complexity. Every identity carries history. Every person belongs to the same extended family. This story does not deny conflict. Families can harm one another. Relatives can become enemies. Shared ancestry does not automatically produce justice. But it removes the fiction that injustice is happening between fundamentally different kinds of beings. It places responsibility where it belongs, on human choices. The same species that invented racial hierarchy can invent institutions that refuse it. The same minds that learned prejudice can learn more accurate patterns. The same country that wrote inequality into law can write stronger protections into law. Progress is not guaranteed. Neither was survival. Our ancestors continued because they responded to changing conditions. They adapted when climates shifted. They altered diets. They developed tools. They moved when they had to. They learned from others. Modern America faces another demand for adaptation. This time, the environment is social. The old racial framework cannot accurately describe the people living inside it. The categories are too rigid. The histories are too mixed. The science is too clear. The cost of maintaining the illusion is too high. Adapting does not mean forgetting where people came from. It means understanding origin more deeply. African American history remains essential. Indigenous sovereignty remains essential. Asian American experiences remain distinct. Latino identities remain varied and meaningful. European immigrant histories remain real. Multiracial people should not be forced to erase any part of themselves. A shared human origin does not flatten culture. It gives culture context. Human beings began together. Then they created thousands of ways to live. Languages, foods, music, ceremonies, beliefs, stories, and communities became responses to different histories. Those differences deserve respect. They do not need biological superiority to be valuable. A song does not become more beautiful because another song is inferior. A tradition does not become meaningful because another community has less worth. Identity can stand without hierarchy. This is the possibility hidden inside the science of skin color. It offers a way to remain different without remaining divided. Look again at your hand. The first time, it may have seemed ordinary. Now it carries a longer story. Its shade may reflect sunlight that fell on people thousands of years before the United States existed. Its pigment may connect you to deserts, forests, coastlines, grasslands, islands, mountains, or northern winters. Its genes may have crossed continents through migration, marriage, conquest, slavery, refuge, or hope. Its appearance may place you inside a social category that has shaped your life in ways both visible and hidden. But your hand does more than display color. It creates. It comforts. It protects. It reaches. It holds another hand. That is the part of human biology no racial system has ever been able to contain. The same basic structure exists beneath every shade. Bones, tendons, nerves, blood vessels, muscles, skin, the hand of a surgeon, the hand of a farmer, the hand of a musician, the hand of a child, the hand of someone crossing a border, the hand of someone signing a law, the hand of someone opening a door. The moral meaning does not come from the pigment. It comes from what the hand chooses to do. That is true of the entire human body. A face can frighten or reassure. A voice can wound or defend. A mind can repeat an old lie or question it. A person can inherit history without becoming its prisoner. You did not choose the skin you were born into. You can choose the meaning you assign to someone else's. You can choose whether difference becomes distance. You can choose whether curiosity replaces assumption. You can choose whether the next generation receives fear or understanding. This is not sentimental optimism. It is another form of adaptation. Human beings survived because they could update their behavior when old strategies stopped working. The old strategy of racial division has not protected America. It has weakened trust, distorted medicine, limited talent, divided communities, and forced millions of people to carry burdens created by myths. A more accurate understanding is not only morally better, it is more useful. It allows medicine to consider ancestry and environment without treating race as destiny. It allows history to explain inequality without blaming biology. It allows communities to celebrate culture without demanding purity. It allows children to form identities without needing someone else to be beneath them. It allows a nation of many origins to see itself clearly. The truth is not that color means nothing. Color has biological meaning in a narrow sense. It affects how skin interacts with ultraviolet radiation. It can influence certain health considerations. It can provide clues about ancestry. In American society, it can shape how others respond to a person. But color does not contain the soul. It does not measure potential. It does not predict goodness. It does not establish citizenship in the human family. That membership was granted long before nations existed. You inherited it from people who survived under the African sun. So did everyone you have ever loved. So did everyone you have ever feared. So did every stranger you passed without noticing. Trace any human life backward far enough, and the modern labels disappear. National borders vanish. Religions have not yet formed. Languages become unrecognizable. Cities disappear. Farms disappear. The categories of white and black disappear. Eventually, all roads lead to dark-skinned human beings in Africa, carrying children, sharing food, watching the sky, and trying to live. They are not someone else's ancestors. They are ours. All of ours. Their skin protected them. Their cooperation sustained them. Their movement transformed them. Their differences multiplied. Their family endured. That is how humans became every color. Not through the creation of separate kinds of people, but through one people adapting to many worlds. Sunlight changed the surface. Time changed the details. Migration rearranged the patterns. Culture changed the meaning. Power turned meaning into hierarchy. Science uncovered the original story, and the original story says this: before race, there was family. Beneath race, there is family. After every category has changed again, there will still be family. Your skin is one page in that history. Your ancestry is one path through it. Your life is one chance to decide what the next chapter will say. The past placed different colors on human bodies. The future will reveal whether we finally learned not to confuse those colors with human value. Look at your hand one last time. What you see is not proof that you are separate. It is proof that your ancestors adapted. What you carry beneath it is not a racial destiny. It is the same ancient human inheritance carried by billions of others. A body built to survive, a mind capable of learning, a heart capable of recognizing another person, and a history that, no matter how far it traveled, never stopped belonging to one family. In the end, skin color is not a measure of who we are. It is a memory of where our ancestors survived. Every shade carries a different history of sunlight, migration, hunger, courage, and adaptation. But beneath those differences, every human being carries the same ancient needs: to be safe, to be loved, to belong, and to leave a better world for the next generation. Today, we live closer to one another than our ancestors could ever have imagined. Different histories now share the same streets, schools, workplaces, and future. The question is no longer whether we come from different places. We do. The question is whether we will continue using those differences to divide us, or finally recognize them as proof of how remarkably adaptable one human family has always been. The color of our skin tells us where we have been. How we treat one another will decide where we go next.